Papua is a region in the eastern part of Indonesia, which is under de facto occupation by the Indonesian armed forces and Kopassus. They're conducting terror operations there, sometimes using these Islamist forces, sometimes using Kopassus men directly. There have been abductions, assassinations, and in one case, the Densus 88 anti-terrorist force went into Papua and arrested a man because he had been sending SMS text messages that were critical of President Susilo. So here you have the CIA-trained, supposed anti-terror unit arresting a peaceful civilian because he uses his cell phone to send out messages criticizing the president. This particular unit, Densus, is expected to be one of the groups that is focused on in Obama's visit, and he's expected to highlight their work with the U.S. and perhaps even announce new aid for them. So what they've been doing, what the TNI and Polri, the Indonesian Armed Forces and Police, have been doing with these various Islamist terror groups is they've been setting them up, funding them, using them for their convenience, but also, when it is sometimes convenient, they've been killing them. And that's what they're doing right now. In the run-up to Obama's visit over the past 2 weeks, they've done a series of raids on these various Islamist groups. They've killed a number of them. They've arrested many others. They've arrested people from mosques who they claim are linked to them. And as one police general privately put it the other day, they're putting on a show for Obama. They want to get new helicopters, new transport planes, new interrogation equipment and training, more computers to spy on more cell phones, more surveillance equipment. They want more of everything from the United States. And by killing people from the Islamist movement that they've been sponsoring for years, they cynically hope that will sell America. It's actually similar in some respects to the situation in Pakistan with ISI, the Military Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. It says something about the state of U.S. politics now, that this push to renew aid or increase aid to the Indonesian military is coming under a liberal Democratic President Obama. It's coming while Obama has, as his Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, a man named Michael Posner, who used to be one of the leading human rights advocates in the U.S. He ran a group in New York called the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, later renamed Human Rights First. They did very good work, for example, on pushing for justice in the case of Munir, the top Indonesian human rights lawyer who was assassinated by BIN, the Presidential Intelligence Agency, by General Mukti and General Hendro Priyono, who was a CIA asset. But now Posner is in the State Department. He's running the Human Rights Bureau, and he and Obama and others are, by all reports, getting ready to circumvent congressional restrictions and push through restored aid restored training aid to Kopassus, the most notorious of the killer forces, and one of the forces that, as I'm reporting today, have been involved in this recent wave of assassinations against political activists in Aceh.
What would the effect, Allan Nairn, of full restoration of military aid to Indonesia have?
It would mean more killing of civilians, because it would make the Indonesian armed forces and police more confident. It would send the message to the Indonesian public that they have more reason to be afraid of the army and police, because now they will be able to see that those forces have the full might of America behind them. So it'll mean more death and more terror on the popular level. On the other hand, it's also the case that the situation is now different than it was in the 1990s. In the 1990s, after the Gilday massacre in occupied East Timor, the massacre that we survived, a grassroots movement grew up in the United States, including the East Timor Action Network, and we were all able to pressure the U.S. Congress to cut off a lot of the military aid to Indonesia. That was under the dictatorship of General Suharto, and that cutoff had a huge effect within Indonesia. It actually contributed to the downfall of Suharto. That's what Suharto's former security chief, Admiral Sudomo, told me. The cutoff was very damaging to them. It helped to bring down Suharto. Then, over the years after that, much of the aid has gradually been restored. But Indonesia is not now in a moment where the Army's power is in the balance. Popular movements are very weak. Much of the middle class, including many middle-class NGO people, have been essentially bought off by the regime. They have very comfortable lives. Foreign expatriates have very comfortable lives. They're making the claim that Indonesia is a new model democracy, even though the poor, who are the vast majority in the country, are being terrorized by the police on a daily basis, and in key areas like Papua, terrorized by the army. So at this moment, it's not as if the U.S. withheld the military aid that could bring down the army, as earlier withholding helped to bring down Suharto. But it will have a marginal effect of definitely increasing the killing and torture that Indonesians suffer. So if Obama does that, he should be held to account. It's especially outrageous on his part, because Obama is a U.S. president who actually understands Indonesia. He was a young boy when he lived there, but in his books, he makes it clear that he knew about the massacres that were going on in the 1960s, the massacres that brought the current regime to power. The army ousted Sukarno, the founding president. The U.S. backed the terror in which more than 400,000 rural peasants, many of them members of the Communist Party, were executed. The CIA gave a list of 5,000 dissidents who they called communists. Also, they were also shot and strangled and slashed to death. And Obama knew about all this. He lived there afterwards. He wrote about it in his book. And he's a smart guy. I'm sure he knows the story of the invasion of East Timor, which was authorized by President Ford and Henry Kissinger, about the very recent terror in Aceh, about the ongoing de facto occupation of Papua. And yet, on the transparently ridiculous excuse that the TNI is the agency to fight the small Islamist terror groups in Indonesia, he's about to supposedly increase U.S. weapons and training to this army.
After I taped this interview with investigative journalist Allan Nairn, he called and said he'd spoken to the Kopassus general who's coordinated the recent assassinations. Allan said the general acknowledged an Indonesian army role in the killings, and the general also told him he himself was U.S.-trained and was enthusiastic about Obama's plans to make the U.S. relationship with Kopassus and Indonesia's army, quote, still more intimate. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.